So, have you ever had a teacher comment on your piece of work, something like needs more explanation, but you actually don't have enough information to provide that explanation? So, I'm going to share a strategy with you now called the 5 hows. It's a fairly simple strategy for when you're researching and inquiring, how you can actually conduct your research in a way that really deepens your understanding so you can answer that question. So let's say you're you're inquiring into the water cycle. You understand a lot about the water cycle from your previous learning, but you come across the idea that the water cycle actually also filters water. And you don't really understand how that works. So you ask yourself your first question: how does the water cycle filter water? So you do a search, you go into Google and you search for water cycle and filtration, and you come up with this as one of the sites. And you scan down, you don't need to read the whole thing, you scan down to just find out how the water cycle filters water. You get to this part, it explains that the water cycle uses distillation, crystallization, sedimentation to filter water, and those are all pretty well explained in the text. And then you get to the idea that the water cycle also filters water through sands, limestone, and small rocks, and you're not quite sure how that works. And you're also wondering, does it filter through soil? Because most of the water is actually going to land on the soil. So you might pose yourself your next question: how does soil filter water? Once again, you go back and you search again, and this time you're going to search for you're going to add soil to your search terms, and you're going to find out when you scan down, once again, you don't need to read it all, you scan down, that the soil filters water through physical, chemical, and biological processes. Now, you could ask a how question about each one of those, but let's just ask a question about the biological processes, and we're going to read further to see if we can answer that question about biological processes. So our new question is: how do biological processes in soil filter water? And if we go back and read further down, we're going to come across the idea that many pollutants are altered by microorganisms in the soil, that bacteria and fungi use pollutants and transform them into something different. So why would bacteria and fungi transform them into something different? I don't really get how that works. So I'm going to ask myself another question here. How do bacteria or fungi in soil use and transform pollutants? So I'm going to add to my search terms, we've got water cycle, filtration, soil. I'm actually going to add bacteria to that and see what I come up with. And one of the sources that I come up with is this one, and I scan down again to try and find the material that I'm looking for. And I find that in this particular case, there were microorganisms in the soil that transformed this pollutant called BAM, and they used it as an energy source. So, now I think I'm getting to some understanding that actually these microorganisms were adapted to use this pollutant as a food. If I read a little bit further, I find these things, everything that was left was just carbon dioxide and water. So I could ask a further how question about what happens inside these bacteria and how they do that transformation. But I think that actually, for my purposes, I've actually understood enough. I think now that after asking my 4 how questions in this case, and by the way, it doesn't always have to be 5, that its soil can filter the water, that soil filters it through biological, chemical, and physical processes, and that biological process involves bacteria or maybe other organisms that are adapted to actually eat these pollutants and turn them into harmless things like carbon dioxide and water. So I think I've actually got enough information now to really, I understand this deeply enough to make use of this in my work. That's the strategy called the 5 hows. Hope you find it useful.